Where you live helps determine the amount of energy that you use. Whether you live in a cold climate and drive everywhere, or a warm climate and are able to take public transport. Hi, and welcome to Unit D. Our first lesson today is on energy on demand. So, we just are going to take a quick look at traditional or Aboriginal versus contemporary energy consumption. So, when we look at the traditional energy sources in the world, most of it originates in the sun, both traditional and contemporary energy sources. Traditional people use the chemical potential of energy stored in wood, as well as in the tar sands in northern Alberta. Contemporary society typically uses energy from fossil fuels, hydroelectric, and biomass, as well as solar and wind, which does all originate from the sun through the um, water cycle and through fossil fuels being old life forms. Now, non solar sources of energy include nuclear energy, geothermal energy, and tidal energy. Two of those are energy from the earth, and one of them is the energy of gravity. So in the late 1800s, coal began to replace wood as an energy source because it was abundant, energy rich, and relatively clean burning. But in the 1950s, we can see that petroleum began to take over from coal because there's diverse sources of petroleum and it's even more energy rich. So it's a denser energy source. So we can see in that red line that the traditional renewable fuels are still used, but the percentage has gone from about 80 to about 10% of the energy used. Where coal started at about 20% in 1860, rose to nearly 70% of our total energy use, and now hovers around 25. Where petroleum really started in the early 1900s and peaked at about just over 40% of our complete energy uses, where natural gas has risen steadily until it's now just about 20% of our energy use. When we look at the world population and fossil fuel use, we can see that the use of fossil fuels really allowed the human population to increase rapidly. This allowed for different types of energy source, and it also increased the urbanization of different countries. So people were able to move from the country into the city where they could find jobs in industry. So we can look at energy consumption by comparing it per capita. So this is the energy consumption used per person. So it's very hard to differentiate the amount of energy used in the world when there is only maybe 1.5 billion people on Earth, compared to now when there's close to 8 billion people on Earth. And so this chart tells us our per capita energy use in 1850. The world used about 11.7 e-joules of energy, and our per capita energy use was 9.44. Now, if we look at 2000, where the world's energy use is up to 426.2 e-joules of energy, and there was over 6 billion people on Earth, our per capita energy use did drastically increase at 69.41. However, this was lower than the peak in 1980 of 72.06. So we can take our per capita energy use and take the total energy consumed in the world and divide it by the total population, and we get our per capita energy use. And we can do this for individual countries or individual cities as well. So there are some factors affecting energy use in different cities, countries, and locations. One of them is climate and geography. So people who live in northern climates who have to heat their houses obviously will have more of an energy need than people who live in more tropical climates, and the ambient outdoor temperature is safe enough for them to live and just open their windows or doors or start fans. Geography also plays a role in the energy use because when you have countries that are more spread out, like Canada, compared to countries that are more compact, like Italy, people in North America and Canada tend to drive farther distances than people in smaller European countries. Also, those great distances between the cities reduce the accessibility of public transit. So we don't have as much energy efficient public transit in Canada as they do in European and Asian countries because of the distance between different locations. Also, the economic activity and lifestyle in different countries affects the energy use. So, again, in North America and Europe, we have higher levels of vehicle ownership than they might in South America. Typically, in North America, we're much more into home ownership and having a larger property and larger house than they are in countries in Europe, where people often will have smaller houses and smaller properties. And when people live in cities in North America, they're typically driving cities and not designed for pedestrian lifestyle compared to some older cities in Europe that were not designed when automobiles were predominant. So they're much more of a walking city. So you can access the resources that you need without your own automobile, where in North America, people will often have one automobile per driver in their household, if not more. Now, the population of countries also affects its energy use because if you have a country with a higher population, typically you have a higher energy use overall, though it may be lower per capita when you do your calculations. So that's a little bit of a look at energy consumption and use in traditional and contemporary societies.